Well, the first thing that comes to mind is it's quiet, so he can hear himself think. One thing I remember since forever is that uh, my dad really needed silence. You know, he had a little office off the bedroom and stuff. He really needed that to, I think, hear the sound of his own voice essentially, and I think the the country, the simplicity, all of that suits his the way he likes to think. He uh, needed his time and the quiet and the focus, and that we were all not so much in service to that. That's too strong a word, but certainly we knew that that was necessary, and uh, had a feeling that supporting that was a good thing. He needed that time to hone his craft and his art. And much like a musician, you say, okay, that you are special in this way, and we need to respect that. It was, in retrospect, now that I hear what life was like for so many other people, sort of freakishly idyllic. We really did get the 60s television world reflected back in a lot of ways, where it was up in the morning and off to school, and you know, encouraged to do well at school, but it also, you know, I think all of us were fortunate that we did okay in school, so there weren't any real issues or friction in that regard. Come home, depending on the age, homework, watch cartoons, whatever it might be, and then like clockwork, my dad would come in the door. I want to say 5:30. I don't know exactly the time, but it was clockwork. We'd hear the garage door close. I mean the door to the garage close in the house. I'm home, and he'd come in, and we'd have dinner on the table, and we'd all eat dinner together, which I think surprises a lot of people. Certainly no television around the dinner table at all, and no father who's distracted or traveling or any of that kind of stuff. We were all there together, and so it felt like, I said, you know, an idyllic childhood for most or all of it, really. I remember him, you know, talking about whatever was going on in any of our lives. My sister probably tells a story that he would occasionally ask her in particular about this or that, or maybe any of us. And then later we realized he was doing some focus group work and seeing if we liked Coke over Pepsi or this or that, or, you know, so there was some of that. But even then, it was about us in a way, you know, and what was going on. So no, I felt that he was connected when he was present with the family, essentially. Well, I think again there was. It's interesting. I don't know whether culture drives people or people drive culture, and it's both. And I think that that's what we were as a family, is that we were a pretty solid representation of what the culture at the time was promoting, you know, which was the hardworking dad that went off every day, the nurturing mother as a homemaker and support system. And that's what we saw. And my mom was that, I mean, in spades. She really represented and was that loving, nurturing, you can count on me mom that, you know, a lot of people wish they had, and we were lucky enough to have. That's a great question, because I think two things were at work. She was a very passionate, heart-connected, loving person that allowed those emotions to to help her connect with people, people connect with themselves, and with her, she had an uncanny ability to be sympathetic, empathetic, and emotional in a certain kind of way. And at the same time, I think she held some emotions back so that she could best essentially do her job, so that she could be the mom that she knew we needed, be the wife that her husband needed, and be the person in the community that she wanted to be. I think there was a combination of both being in touch and connected to certain emotions and putting some of them on the shelf so she could be what she needed to be for others. And again, this is, I think, part of the cultural time. So part of it is, as an adult, feeling kind of maybe frustrated that my mom kept herself in check a little bit for the sake of the family, but there's also a beauty in that. I think a lot of mothers do it. But it's a tricky one because she did, I think, put a lot of her own personal trajectory either on hold or just shunted it in order to give what she felt was necessary to the family. It's funny because I got that feeling deeply from my mother when I was young, and yet when I was young, I didn't recognize the profundity of it. I just knew that I felt special because my mom made me feel special and supported me in ways that, again, I didn't even recognize in myself. And I think it was exactly for that reason, because my mom saw parts of herself in me and wanted to nurture that, maybe because she didn't get to have some of those things for herself. And so she said, look, I'm going to put that into my child, and he can enjoy some of the things that I put on the shelf. I have to say I was aware of both of my parents' musical talents growing up. My mom, more overtly to the world, as she sang later in life and that sort of thing, did do those things at home, played the piano and sang some. But I would say equally, my dad would be playing the ukulele and singing around the house and whistling. They both really had an underlying musical thing that they expressed. I would say yes. I would say that the unfolding self-expression of a culture, again, that came from the 60s and the 70s. So first you saw, economic and social justice specifically for African Americans, but then that just bloomed into, boy, there's a lot of us that have been quiet for a long time, and I think we need to start speaking. And so I can't imagine that didn't affect her in her own way as she got older, for sure. By being in the soup of this culture that was starting to say, hey, wait a minute, I think I've been quiet long enough and I need to find out who I am and how to express that. It had to have absolutely affected her as she was getting into the 70s and 80s. I would say I didn't understand it exactly, but it wasn't entirely surprising as either, because when you're in a home, you're feeling it as much as it's being told to you or described to you or shown to you. And so I think there was a feeling in me that my mom was in fact diverting or shunting some aspect of herself for the greater good, which again is much to be honored, certainly. But when she did start to sing, when she did decide to move to San Francisco, when she did these things, I could see if I thought about it, I could feel the reasons why. It made sense. And in fact, only recently, and this is extreme, of course, but I remember when I was a kid, on our bookshelf, I saw Maya Angelou's book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And only recently have I gone, oh, okay, that's interesting, because there's a reflection there of my own mother's experience. Well, again, in the feeling realms, I think he probably did on a certain level and knew that my mom had given so much for everybody else in the family that there was a certain feeling that, okay, it is your turn to find yourself in your way, and this is part of that process. I don't think he liked it necessarily. I mean, he would have preferred that they'd stay together, but he respected it. You know, he knew that there's something she needed to do, and that he certainly was doing what he needed to do his entire life, and that she deserved it, essentially. Just the idea that here are my parents that on a certain level couldn't look more different. You know, my dad's got this focused, introspective, deep directive, and my mom's got this extroverted, open, loving, everyone's included sense, and yet they really were the perfect sides of the same coin, because in their hearts, in their gut, they both were deeply committed and connected to social justice and economic justice. And so as a little kid in a house in 1964, you could feel something when they came together with that kind of passion and feeling around that. And so it affected me deeply in ways that I'm only now really starting to fully see and understand. But the feeling I got from her in terms of the necessity of this, of the work around civil rights, and also the friends we had, the people we hung out with, the people that we would visit, and the people she would have at the dining room table or the breakfast table, really, when I would come home from elementary school for lunch and have my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, she'd be there at the table with somebody that didn't look like us, you know, in some way, shape, or form. And it was an extraordinary thing, again, in retrospect, to watch her talk with somebody and learn from them. And I really could see this person who essentially was showing me that everyone has something to teach, that if you listen, you ask the right questions, and you open your heart, they will probably open theirs, and you'll probably get something that is invaluable in terms of learning about human nature. And she had that in ways that very few people had. My dad has a story where the two of them were invited to a baseball game for some reason, and that's not something they normally would do. And they're there with their friends, and they're just in the stands. They're not in some box or anything. They're in the stands. My dad goes to get a hot dog, and by the time he returns, the woman next to them, that's a complete stranger, is leaning into my mother saying, "I've never told anyone this before in my life." And that is the story of my mother. It's a fascinating study because it's true. Both of their fathers in particular, and parents in general, were arch conservatives from everything I can read and tell about their lives. And, you know, it's often said that you either rebel or adapt to your parents' behavior. And I think that for whatever reason, and again, it's beautiful they found each other because they both loved their parents and were deeply connected to the fathers in particular, who were these sort of almost fire and brimstone types. But they just knew it as a new day and a new time, and that this was not how you think about other human beings. So it really is a fascinating study because not only did they come from these strict conservative ideologues, but they had the power and influence later in life to not only, you know, change their views, but shape culture to some extent. It was amazing. Well, the deep memory I have is a moment at the end of Thanksgiving when they happened to both be at the back door. I don't know what was happening, and it was just the moment of insight into the deep pain that was the fundamental nature of their relationship. I don't know the details of how it got to that point, but just for a slice in time, I saw how deep it went, just in the inability to connect and to have a short conversation. And I forget the details, but again, what I felt was like magnets opposite, like this repelling nature that was powerful. And only much later did my mom say, did you notice how often Dad would take a nap during Thanksgiving? And I hadn't noticed it, but I realized that the difficulty of him being in the presence of his mom was very real. As a kid, it wasn't heavy, there was that's why that little teeny moment of heaviness sticks out, because it was just sort of the way things were, and my grandmother was never angry at me. I never felt it, really. I do remember as a teenager, I used to be this peace-loving little kid, and I would say to my mom, what's the point of getting angry, because you get over it eventually, and it just hurts everybody, blah, blah, blah. And we're at my grandmother's house, and my mom says, tell Grandma how you feel about anger. And again, only in retrospect did I realize she was trying to make a point through me, which was kind of funny. And yeah, it was just, those were my only small experiences with it. What I saw first and foremost, day in and day out, was consistency. He was and is incredibly consistent. And again, in retrospect, as a child, what do you want more than anything? You want to feel safe. And consistency is a great way to feel safe, especially when it's solid, good, loving consistency. Again, he didn't come home mad at the boss and needing a drink and being angry. He loved what he did, and he did it every day the exact same way. And so as a kid, I could count on that. And having a father you can count on, and really not laying down a lot of rules. I mean, he let my mom do most of that. He did a little bit of it. But what I've learned, again, is that by giving us the opportunity to make mistakes and to color outside the lines a little bit, but expect us to do well in school and all these things, he didn't, by not having a lot of rules, it puts a lot of the rules on you. And it's an interesting thing, because people assume that you have to lay down the law, to get kids to be this or that or behave in a certain way. But the truth is, if you give them a lot of rope, they don't want to hang themselves. They want to do well. They want to be, to look good in your eyes and to live up to expectations of some form or another. So the kind of laissez-faire attitude that my dad had was, I think, a pretty spectacular parenting tool, because it came with a certain kind of moral compass that he just exemplified. He didn't have to say anything. I would say an even patience, a willingness to wait, and not, it's interesting because emotions are valuable, but to also recognize that at times they may ride you a little harder than they should. And I think I've got that, the kind of even-tempered patience that he has. I always think we're born with our parents' DNA, of course, and like the strings on a harp, if you're around that, you get sympathetic vibrations of those particular aspects of your own DNA, right? So you're picking up aspects of your parent that sort of resonate with you. Well, it's funny because it's aspect of the same thing in a way. And I think with her, it's that quality, but also a certain humility that I think they both have, actually, and recognizing that everyone does have something to teach, and listening and learning from others, I think, is the quality I have from my mom's. I think what they would both agree on is that money represents choice, and that's where they saw the value. That's certainly where my mother saw the value. She really recognized that the money gave us all and her a choice in a lot of ways that a lot of people didn't have. Uh, and my dad definitely saw it as the scorecard. I mean, it's just literally telling him that he made the right choice, right decision, right move in terms of an investment. But I think, again, kind of back to the choice and the freedom of it, it did set my mother free to do things, not for her own interests, but to, you know, the money is essentially just energy. And if you're holding on to it, it doesn't do anybody any good. And so my mom liked to release it and help people in various ways to have choices in their life that she knew she was lucky to have in hers. It's interesting because while the money, in a sense, doesn't mean anything to my dad, he doesn't have any utility for it. He's not buying houses and cars and all these things, but it does mean something to him. So it's this very interesting combination of being both meaningless and very meaningful, because it is the scorecard. So in some ways, he does want to hang on to it because it keeps showing the A pluses, you know, all the time. And so I think that's where the rub probably was, is that my mom said, what's the point if it's being held? You know, it needs to be released and things happen here. But at the same time, my dad was saying, yeah, but it's you know, what a good boy am I? You know, look what I've done with all of this. So, so there's a little bit of friction in that. The assumption was she would outlive him, and that all of the money would go to her foundation, the Susan T. Buffett Foundation, and all the work that that foundation does now and would continue to do. So that was upended, obviously, when she passed away first. But the assumption was that she would essentially inherit it all, and that it would all go into the works that the foundation was doing. I think it was a temporary change as he was grappling with it. I mean, this was an unknown world for him. He didn't expect it, and as any of us would, you know, with a new experience, it's like, I'm not sure what to do, how to do it, what I'm feeling, how to express those feelings. So I think it was essentially that. It was a smooth sailing for essentially his entire life, and then a big bunch of rocks that he hit and was surprised by it, and I think took the time to heal from whatever he needed to, but then pretty much picked up where he left off. Maybe like any of us who look back and sort of handpick the things that remind us of how we got to where we are, I think that is why there's a certain reverence around the newspaper work in particular, and you connect it to Berkshire Hathaway because there's a direct connection. I mean, there's a certain loyalty and consistency and morality to how he did it, and the amount of work he could take on, and then he could take on more, and it didn't bring him down. It made him even more determined to be the best, and to understand the numbers of it. You know, all the little pieces of the delivery work in particular, the paper delivery, really shine in terms of his later character. And so that for him is a great example of who he became, I think. You know, my dad doesn't really talk about his childhood too much. His sister does some, so we get some insight there for sure. But even not talking about it says something. But, you know, my mom says that early on, when they would go to a social function, my dad could barely talk. I mean, he just wasn't either self-assured or comfortable in social surroundings or whatever it might have been. But she really helped him, in a sense, grow up and out of a lot of the baggage, the traumatic experiences he had as a child. And, you know, she may well have been the first woman he trusted, you know, and it probably took years to establish that trust and the bond and the love that they had. I think, which is why it held up, even under the complexities of their later marriage, because there was something forged in those probably first few years, 5 years, that my dad had never felt with another female. It of course speaks to my mom, almost martyr status. I mean, saintly for sure, but it might go even a little further, where she would give up herself for someone else's comfort or happiness or security. And he was, in fact, that first person where she said, I'm going to put myself aside and love this person because they are so damaged in a way. That's sort of what happens when you do get taken care of and you are someone's first patient. You tend to not know how dinner is cooked and you know where the grocery store is, and you know he was protected. I mean, and I think personally I wouldn't want that life. I would want to feel connected to real things, but he's not like the rest of us. You know, again, I do liken it to a musical artist or even a sports star, you know, who's so good at something and so uniquely qualified for something that the rest of the world, you know, there's managers and agents and all these things for a reason. You know, the rest of the world sort of takes care of them and to some extent coddles them. To some extent it's warranted, because there are special people that come into this world that don't have everything together, but they have a certain gift that allows them a little bit of a pass in some ways. And my dad's gotten a little bit of a pass, and I think that's fair. But at the same time, the people around him sometimes. I don't think my dad ever took anybody for granted at all, but you are a little bit blind, I think, sometimes to what other people might be doing behind the scenes because you're able to focus. I think his comfort zone is the determining factor for his business decisions in terms of you know, that's why he goes for brands like he does and goes for things with the big moat around. You know, I mean, think about it. He's built a big moat around himself, and both in an emotional way, in an economic way, he can do it just the way he wants. And so he understands what having a moat means. And so when he finds a business like Coke that has a big competitive advantage, he gets it on a certain kind of visceral level, I think, and that's what attracts him to it. It's phenomenal, and I think that is so much a key to his success. Is he hasn't done things for anybody else. You know, he's done it, and so it works for him, and what's worked for him has, of course, worked for a whole lot of other people. You know, the shareholders are thrilled that he's built this this business around his own deep level of comfort. And that's to be applauded, because most people are doing things to say, look at me, look at what I've accomplished, look at, you know, all these things that I'm taking on and all the rest of it. And if anything, again, it's a little bit like my own approach in music. I have friends who would work hard at learning more and getting more complex and technically harmonic and being able to fly around. If I could hit one note on the piano and I could speak everything, that's what I would do. You know, so it's going for that resonance that works for you and also can work in the world. Well, you know, the way I remember it is that I got a call from my sister and said, "Are you near a fax machine?" Which tells you something about the era. It wasn't that long ago, but out came a letter that was the beginnings of, and it got tweaked a little bit here and there, of the idea that we were going to get a significant amount of money to run a foundation, and then the Gates Foundation and the Susan T. Buffett Foundation. But there was no conversation. I mean, it was actually hints of it. I mean, I remember my dad maybe at Christmas or something saying, "I think I'm going to do something kind of big, and there'll be a few people upset and blah blah blah." So he would sort of hint around the edges, but we didn't know what it was going to be until it was written. Which, in retrospect, I mean, my dad prefers things written down, so he did it in the way he would have preferred it, and in fact, it is helpful to see, okay, this is the plan. But also very strange to not have a conversation about it. And so that's really how it unfolded. And we got that letter probably about 3 months before the actual announcement. And again, there were some tweaks to how it happened and various things. But basically, we found out that way. He was in Southern California, and I was doing the show at the Paley Center there. And so I said, "Hey, come on up." And I honestly don't know whether it was his idea or my idea to play ukulele with me. Probably mine, but he could have offered. I mean, that's the kind of person he is with that kind of stuff. He loves to ham it up a little bit and to be part of the fun, essentially. And so we worked that out, in rehearsal a little bit, and off we went. But it was very fun to have that as a moment, right? Because they don't come often, and yet it shows his willingness to get up there and say, "Let's do something together." Well, it's interesting because I didn't think about it at the time other than it was just nice that everybody came to our house. And for whatever reason, that was true, So we would have our own Christmas, classic, run down before everybody's up and then try and wake everybody up and be frustrated because your older brother and sister don't get up as early as you do. So wait around. And then slowly the cousins would come over and grandparents and all of that. And we would have a big Christmas dinner at our place. And so again, it was right out of a Rockwell painting or something, and it felt great. And to have the cousins there, and again, to grow up in not only a community of people who knew me in the neighborhood or at school, but to have my grandparents 2 blocks away, to have my cousins close by. It was like the old days when families probably all lived within blocks or a few miles of each other, and that's what Christmas was. Being the youngest, it was mostly just this kind of phantasmagorical moment where it's like, wow, what? But yeah, that and things like that didn't happen often, I think, in Omaha in general, and certainly at our house, other than things like Christmas and things where we all gathered. But to have kind of a wild 60s party was a lot of fun. I mean, and especially because we had the minister of the church we went to, and you maybe have a photograph of this, painting one of these girls in a bikini. And it's just right out of, I mean, it'd be horrible to think of doing that now. But then everybody was having a good time, and it was, it was a lot of fun. And of course, having a couple of friends over to spend the night that night was, we felt pretty special. I think he is deeply competitive, but it's very well concealed, at least sometimes. Maybe it isn't. Maybe his success shows exactly that. But I think he has a very deep competitive quality to him. While I think he is deeply competitive, if I was a kid, and he was playing some game with me, he would let me win. I mean, so there's that side of it too, for sure. My understanding is that when my mother left Omaha and went to San Francisco, my dad had a few friends, including my mother's sister, Dorothy. They would go to the movies together, that sort of thing, and a few other people that he would spend some time with just to be social. And at some point early on, I don't know whether my dad was ill or just kind of lost a little bit in terms of how he was going to take care of himself. But my mom knew Astrid, as we all did, from the French Cafe in Omaha, and suggested to her that she might go over there with some chicken soup or whatever it might be to help take care of him a little bit. And that's how they met. I know they talked constantly, so they still had a certain kind of connection. And I'm not sure my mom ever felt that she could get into a certain place with my dad. I don't think my dad, and that gets back to whatever trauma, whatever complexities he had in his own childhood. I think he decided to build a moat probably when he was about 4 or 5, and I would bet that that was built up enough to where my mom, what she did do is chip away at the roughest part of that so that he could be in the world and of the world to some extent. But I don't think she ever could say that while she touched him in ways nobody else did, there's no question about that, that he would ever reciprocate in certain ways and come out of his own protective shell. Part of it is the time, where there is always the woman behind the man, right? Which is the way the 50s and 60s unfolded for a lot of people. And I think they both took that role very seriously. And my mom really did, in ways we'll never understand, in terms of the very early years, in a sense, socialize my dad and really give him the safety. And again, I think a lot of this is around his own complexities with his mother and probably with women because of it, and that my mom shifted that feeling in him and gave him that safety and that nurturing that we all need, and my mom provided, and that gave him the foundation, the basis to say, oh, okay, I'm okay, I can do this, I'm getting confidence, I have someone behind me that believes in me. Who knows what kind of pep talks were going on in those early years, but I'm sure there were a lot of them, and it did make him the person he is today, for sure. If I had to tell you right now, I would say she had that surgery for others because my dad needed her, other people loved her. These are all real love and concern, but my mom would always, and I think even in this case, say, okay, I'll go through this, because she knew it was going to be really difficult. She knew the recovery was going to be brutal. She knew that it would eventually come back, that this was not something that was going to be gone forever. So unfortunately, I believe that a lot of her actions, even in those stages, were done for other people. It killed her, essentially. I mean, it really did, because she probably started doing things too soon. I'm sure of it, and she would constantly be doing things because she felt other people needed her. He went dark, essentially quiet and inward for a certain amount of time. I forget exactly. Again, my sister being in Omaha would have a much better reference. But it was from the end of July, beginning of August of 2004 until sometime later in the fall, winter, 6 months maybe. I'm not sure how long. What he did in that time, I can't tell you in terms of real coping mechanisms or the skills he may have had. He had some people around him a lot in the beginning, but he's a solitary guy, and he had lived essentially a solitary life in a lot of ways. So there wasn't the infrastructure there, I think, in a deep way to carry him through. So he did what he does, which is he did it himself to some extent. And again, not that friends weren't there rallying around to do what they could, but I think it came down to him figuring out how he was going to get through this tunnel and get out the other side. It didn't surprise me too much because he can compartmentalize and he has protected himself. So I think that however he does that for his needs, he did it. And what else is he going to do? I mean, he's done this his whole life in terms of his work and the way he's done his work. And the best thing he could do for himself is to get back and start doing it again. So I thought it was great. And I was impressed, actually, that he was able to get through it and get back into who he was. I think for both of them, it's, you know, deeply perfect because she doesn't want anything other than a companion that allows her to feel safe and that, you know, just safe and connected. And my dad, that's all he wants too. You know, I mean, they found each other, and it's been wonderful that they did get married after my mom passed. You know, I think that was a complex time in terms of Astrid giving so much and sort of being in waiting a little bit there. And so I'm glad that got consummated in that way. And yeah, they're a very unique match for sure, in a good way. Yeah, I'm the one child that probably wasn't crazy about going to Laguna Beach. I might be wrong in that, but you know, when we were young, I mean, this was 1963, I think, the first time we went. So I can't, then I did. I mean, it was summer, and we got to go someplace exotic compared to Omaha, and we rented a house for years, you know, consistently. And it was fun, and I'd be able to bring friends out for a couple weeks or that kind of thing. But actually right around the time we actually bought the house, which I forget, 1971 or something like that, I was 13, and, you know, no 13-year-old knows anything about who they are, where they want to be, or what they want to do, and I was no exception. And so Laguna then felt like it wasn't me. I didn't really want to be there. It didn't hold the same kind of memories I think it holds for most people in the family, frankly. It's not that it was negative, it just wasn't, it didn't do it for me. Music was such a big part of really all of our lives in some ways, in terms of I was the most musically inclined in some ways. I mean, I would just go to the piano and play and make things up and hear songs in my head and just naturally took to it. But my sister loved music. She was a child of the 60s, right? So she would bring home all sorts of stuff that I would soak up before I would otherwise be you know, exposed to it. But my mom did too. So my sister would bring home the rock and my mom would bring home the soul. So she brought home Aretha Franklin, or she brought home you know, Sly and the Family Stone or something. So she really pushed music out into our home in a big way. And so it made sense when I would leave that she would find that as a certain solace and a place to go. And then when I would come home from college, I'd bring her records that I'd heard in college, and we'd trade, you know, things we'd heard. So it was a big part of our communication. The piece that struck me immediately when we were talking about my compositions and this documentary was the song New West that I wrote. I still remember sitting at the keyboard in probably the mid-'80s and feeling both a sense, it's hard to put into words exactly, that's why it's music, but it's a little bit of a longing and a feeling of loss in a way, but also possibility. And I mean, that particular song holds a lot of feelings inside of it, because I think part of me as a kid felt a little bit in my own world. I was enough younger than my siblings to not quite have the same things going on in my life at the time. I think I felt my mom's longing in a certain kind of way, that she had chosen a path in her life that meant that she was going to shut down aspects of herself. And I think that's in the song, and I think I felt it as a kid. But at the same time, there was love and nurturing and connection, and there were a lot of, many wonderful things about being inside that container when I was growing up. And so it's a combination of feelings that really I don't have words for, which is why I wrote the song. Searching for a Place Called Home, which is another one that was played at her service, and by the title, it tells you a lot. I mean, it really is saying, what is home? Where is home? What does it mean to me? And how do I find it? And that song also has a certain quality of both. I mean, it's in a major and a minor key, right, in different parts of the song. So it has a certain almost triumphant and loving quality to it, but also a longing and who am I and where do I fit in quality to it. It was in the mid-'70s, again, when I was in my teens, and so I was focused on me a lot, so I didn't know a lot about it. But it was clear that working with Kay gave him a different kind of confidence. Again, I think up until then, he was this nerdy kid in Omaha that was just had his head down and was doing his thing. And when he started to have the relationship with Kay, my guess is that Kay really brought him into her world as sort of a trophy in a sense. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but like, look at this kid that I found in Omaha that's doing these amazing things that nobody's heard of, and he's helping me tremendously, and he's worth paying attention to. And so my dad got this boost from being with her, both personally and professionally, I think, or socially, whatever it might be, that he had never gotten before in that way and at that scale. And what a time, again, with what the Washington Post was becoming and what he was becoming and what Washington political society and New York society was, it was booming, I'm sure, and he was the star. And I think that was a tremendous gift to him. My father's diet, the famous diet. Well, I can tell you that I have been in the kitchen more than one time in the morning and seen him come down and open the freezer and eat ice cream for breakfast. So that's a fact. And everything else is too. I mean, he has the diet of a 5-year-old. He will eat essentially whatever he wants. I mean, he has perfected that thing that we were talking about before in terms of being in his comfort zone and it working for him. And his diet is the best mind over matter example that I could think of probably ever anywhere. I see him still being, speaking of diet, really energized and fed by the work he does, and quite frankly, the adulation that he gets and deserves. I mean, I think he's now, and I don't mean that in a superficial way. I mean that when kids come from a business school to speak with him and hear him talk, that feeds him, and rightfully so. And so I think those kinds of things actually keep him as young as I think he's ever been. I think that is something, it's funny because on my mother's side, her father was a preacher and a teacher and a coach and all these things. And I think he also had that on his side in different ways. So, we've watched him kind of grow into that, but something I think he's always loved to do. I mean, which is very different than the solitary nature of a lot of the mid part of his life. But early on, he was teaching some, and I think he really does enjoy that. Well, she was cremated, and so her ashes are in various places. My sister oversees essentially the bulk of them. And one thing you have to ask my sister if she's okay with me saying this before you actually put it in, but I think she did an extraordinary job when she spread a little bit of my mother's ashes in the Bergdorf shoe department. I think that was one of the most beautiful acts ever. But no, we all have a little bit of her that we carry with us. But yeah, that's where she is. Her parents are buried at Forest Lawn in Omaha, Nebraska, as is my grandmother on my grandparents on my dad's side. And in fact, I think everyone in the Buffett family, at least immediately, is there. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't know if she has a gravestone because that was never where the service was. Right. I mean, it's fun to go back to the house and realize that's the house you grew up in, right? So we only know one house. Now, my sister and brother know a little bit more, but I was born about a month after, God bless my mother, I don't know how she did it, after we moved into 5505 Farnham. So that's the only house I've known. So when I see images in the backyard, we've added on a little here and there, but it was an incredible life. I mean, to have this home that was solidly yours from the minute you came home from the hospital, and to have a big old backyard that you could run around in with friends and have a neighborhood where everybody essentially knew each other. And, my siblings and my sister and brother are in a way much closer because they grew up together in a lot of ways. I think 18 months apart or something. And I was the younger kid that my sister protected in a lot of ways, which was wonderful. And I was always included in a way, but there's a little bit of like I said before, kind of a loner quality to a lot of what I did, but I enjoyed that. I mean, that was my nature in a lot of ways. But yeah, I'm trying to think of. I can imagine the images that you're showing, and it was basically probably just us all running around and having a good time, and a lot of family. Again, cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents. The fact that our house was the gathering place, which again, my mom made sure that was the case, was amazing. It's like having the campfire where everybody comes around. And so to have those memories so solidly locked into a place I can still go to and visit is pretty special. Very cool. Surprisingly, no, which is maybe the dumbest thing I've ever done in my entire life. But we were very fortunate, and you may know this history, but when his father died, he left all the grandchildren a farm. And my dad sold that farm, and we all got Berkshire Hathaway stock. So in a sense, he was doing the best thing he could have done for us financially before we even knew what finances were. And when I decided to leave school and pursue a music career, I did seek his advice in terms of like, this is what I've got. What should I do? How should I spend it? What should I be careful of? Just the basics essentially, because he was encouraging me to spend it to an extent, but of course not be foolish with it. And so he gave me advice around which stuff to spend, what to keep, what to think about in terms of expenses, that kind of thing. And that was probably about the only time I went to him. And it was partly to ask permission in a way, or at least let him know this is what I was going to do, and I hope that's okay. And then partly, again, to ask the advice financially of kind of what should I do here. And I sort of followed it. Yeah, there was an article in the Omaha World Herald in, I think, the late 60s, and I'm pretty sure it was on the front page and it was on the left-hand column, that you could probably find, that for the first time named the number of how much money he had. And that was a blip, and I thought, okay, this is unique. But the numbers didn't really mean anything. I was too young, and so truly, the first time when I thought, okay, this is different, and we're going to be treated differently because of it, was the first time he was on, and it may have been the first, Forbes 400 list. And he was, if not the richest, he was right up there and one of the richest people in the world. And my mom and I talked probably that day, kind of laughing nervously, like, wow, now people are going to think we're different than we are. And isn't that strange how we know us, we know how I grew up and all the rest of it, but now suddenly there's going to be all this projection and assumption and all those things. So, and I was in my mid-20s probably, or certainly early 20s, but probably mid-20s by then. So it really took that long to get a sense that, something's a little different here. That's a good question. I think it probably did, although she was very good at keeping a pretty low profile, the best I think she could have been. And she worked at that. She didn't want to be Mrs. Warren Buffett if she could help it. And so I think she did pretty well at that. Me being in the music business, everybody thought I was related to Jimmy Buffett. So it wasn't an issue for me until Jennifer and I moved to New York in 2005. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, and think about that. I'm, much older by then. And that's the first time when I thought, wow, this is different and not comfortable, and I don't like it. And it's, of course, because New York, that's what they think about is money and investing in financial things. Well, I think part of it might be to keep his brain sharp. I think a lot of it for him is a mental exercise that he loves to do. I mean, it's both something he's done since childhood and he enjoys, but he also recognizes, I think, that it will keep him on point a little bit. That would be my guess. He's never said that, but I think that's probably true. And he, if he's going to pick a distraction, that's going to be it, because he isn't really interested in distraction that much, but something that he knows and loves and can play, that's the thing for him. I think it's, it's interesting how he's taken to it, and that's the only thing online he's probably interested in. Well, I'm doing the show. The show was born out of literally people saying, wow, you're Warren Buffett's son, you're so normal. And, and that struck me because of all the things we're talking about. Here I grew up in this loving place, wonderful neighborhood, all this stuff that is the soup of normalcy. And so to have these rather later in life projections and assumptions put on me because I am my father's son, and then to go out and sort of bust the assumptions by saying, well, actually, this is what it was like, is a lot of fun for me because I like to kind of remind people that the real privilege is growing up in a home where you've got two parents that support you and love you, and you've got grandparents 2 blocks away, and you've got cousins and all these things. And so a lot of the early part of the show is about that. It's about setting the stage with both my parents, front and center, with what it means when you raise a child who feels safe and seen, and how critical that is, and how rare, sadly, that is for so many people and so many families. We did the show at the Paley Center, but then the show developed quite a bit, and I performed in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he piled a whole bunch of people from the office into a van and came down to see the show. And he did the same thing with my Spirit show when it was on the Mall in Washington. I mean, he literally, traffic was bad. He got out of the car and ran to make it to the event. He is a champion of each of us when we need one. It's pretty extraordinary. And I felt that as a kid. I remember when I was buying my Volkswagen Rabbit and the dealer was being sort of jerky about something, and my dad just went hot. I mean, I've never seen him get so angry, honestly. And I thought, this is pretty cool. My dad is coming to my defense. And I always feel that he would, and that he would come to cheer me on. And my wife Jennifer would say she was sitting next to him at the spirit show, and he wouldn't really get it, but he'd look around and see everybody else getting it and cheering, so he'd cheer too. And that's pretty great. I mean, as focused and seemingly disconnected as he can be, he does know that he's a dad and can show up as one.